Take a person, take a story, take you on a journey. It's your take.
On today's Your Take, I'm joined by a Canadian musician who has released 20 albums as a solo performer. My guest's musical career began in Toronto, where her song Wisdom Bus won a nationwide songwriting award. With the prize money, my guest recorded the album, the original Leap Year, which was released on her own label, Dead Daisy Records. The album attracted the attention of Mercury Records, who signed my guest to the label. Her first release on Mercury was 1998's Public, a Britpop-inspired album which yielded the Canadian hit Summerlong and a nomination for Best New Solo Artist at the Juno Awards. My guest would go on to join David Bowie's band as a backup singer and keyboard player in 1999. She arranged and performed piano on astronaut Chris Hadfield's cover version of David Bowie's Space Oddity, formed the musical collective The Cake Sale with Gary Lightbody of Snow Patrol, Bell X1, Josh Ritter, and Glen Hansard. She also wrote the best-selling book, The Healing Power of Singing, Raise Your Voice, Change Your Life, What Touring with David Bowie, Single Parenting, and Ditching the Music Business Taught Me in 25 Easy Steps. Today's guest is Emm Gryner, who shares with us the story of her life, her career, and of course, her musical journey. A warm summer's July evening here in the UK, and afternoon where you are in Toronto, Canada.
Yes, I'm actually 2 hours from Toronto near a place called Stratford. We've named all of our places after you guys, so.
The famous Shakespeare, of course, yeah.
Yeah, so we also have a London just down the road, which we've tried very hard to make as cool as your London. Still working on it.
Very much looking forward to talking to you about your life, the music, where those kind of inspirations and influences come from. But I always like to wind the clock back to the very beginning, if I can, Em. Let's take the clock back now to June the 8th, 1975. You were born in the city of Sarnia in Ontario, Canada. What are your memories from childhood and growing up in the community of Forest? And can you give us some background on your parents, what they did for a living, and do you have siblings?
Mm-hmm. So I actually grew up in the country, and my mother immigrated from the Philippines when she was 20. So it was 1964. She was the first of her family to she came to the US first, and then she came to Canada. And she met my dad. She was a nurse, and my dad kind of jumped around. He was Canadian, Irish Canadian, did a bunch of odd jobs. And they eventually bought a newspaper when I was 5 years old. And this newspaper was about chickens. And it, like, unbeknownst to me, chickens were a whole sort of industry. This was like showing chickens. So we would go as a family to these chicken shows, and then my parents would put the newspaper together in our basement. So it was sort of a odd, sheltered kind of upbringing in the country, but my parents were like their own bosses. So I think that was a good glimpse for me at, like, you know, they never had to leave the house for work. So other than to go to the chicken shows. So it was a really, it sounds like a really odd upbringing, but you know, when you grow up in that environment, it's just what you know. So
from your upbringing, I next want to move on to the music, because you were performing from a very early age, but I wanted to pick up on if you came from a musical family and what sort of music was being played around the house when you were growing up as a child.
Yeah, you know, I was really lucky because we didn't have the distractions of internet and all of that. So music was a real like salvation for for me. I learned piano when I was younger, and I did really enjoy it until, I got a little older. And we listened to the radio a lot, which makes me sound really ancient, but it was a lot of that music coming across from Detroit, and like listening to American Top 40 that really informed a lot of the things that I love now. But my dad was a real jazz person. Neither of my parents played music, but they didn't play it themselves, but they played a lot of records in the house. So there was this aversion to jazz, which I had early on, and I've since kind of flip-flopped on that. But yeah, so very musical upbringing, just by osmosis. I don't think parents necessarily need to be musical for the kids to kind of find something creative in their upbringing.
Music you mentioned as a salvation, and you mentioned about listening to music being played on the radio. I want to pick up about playing piano from such an early age. You were only 4 years of age. Can you recall who your teacher was?
Yeah.
And how long did it take you to learn the instrument and play competently? And what made you decide to go on and learn other instruments such as bass and then guitar?
Well, yeah, I mean, the thing with starting so early at an instrument is that you can't even remember not being good at it. So, by the time I wanted to quit my lessons, I had already gone quite far with classical training. So I had all the tools to like write songs, which I didn't really know was coming. But my teacher was this woman named Margaret Fawcett, and I write about her in my book. And she was very, very strict. She dedicated her whole life to her piano. She had this pristine piano in her house. She didn't have any family that lived with her. So she was really, really tough on me, and I'd come out of there crying all the time. But she really kind of built a thick skin for me. I built that thick skin as a result of those lessons. I'm not saying that's how it should be, but that's what happened. And yeah, so just with that tool, I later just started to write songs, and that's when it became really interesting and fun for me.
We're obviously going to talk about in depth your musical career and all the things you've done as a solo artist, and obviously people you've collaborated with. But next, I wanted to talk about your schooling, your education. You went to North Lambton Secondary School in Forest, Ontario. What are your memories from your time there? What subjects did you excel in? And did you have any aspirations at school to become a professional musician?
Yeah, that's a good question. Prior to that, I went to a Catholic school for 10 years. So I think going to a public high school was just like, woohoo. It was like, wow, so different, and such a meld of different people. There's a big Indigenous community near where I grew up. So a lot of those folks were there. There was an athletic community. There was a musical community. And I kind of loved everyone. And the thing that I loved the most in terms of a subject really was music, because the school was so small. We didn't have a lot of sports. Like we didn't have a football team or a basketball team. So a lot of, focus was on the music program. And my music teachers were really engaged with the kids. So they let us do band practice in the music room. We would talk about albums. I was really into Sting. Like we talk about, hey, let's new Sting albums out, or all different kinds of music we'd be talking about. And I don't think you often get that chance to talk to teachers about whatever it is that you love. And they were very patient and made a lot of time to listen. They also, my music teacher, Dave Williams was his name. He was also like playing as well. He was like a touring musician in the area. So when you see that someone's just, doing more outside of their teaching, I found that really inspiring. So they definitely helped shape that possibility that I could do music,
From talking about music, playing instruments, of course, and your love and wanting to go into the music business from an early age, I wanted to talk about graduating from high school, and you went to Fenshaw College, where you were involved in the music arts program in 1995.
Mhm.
What do you think you learned about yourself and musical performance during your time there? And do you think it gave you the necessary skills and knowledge to go on and work in the music industry?
Yeah, that's a really good question. This program was, now there's a lot of recording and industry programs out there, but this one was very unique. It had been around for a while, and the teachers were very accomplished. Like my production teacher was Jack Richardson, who had produced Alice Cooper and Bob Seger and the Guess Who. So like to learn from someone like that was pretty amazing. And how it helped was that it was like a mini music industry. Like things weren't perfect. There were politics, people would get upset, and you'd be like doing sessions, you'd be planning gigs. So from that standpoint, it was great just to like kind of feel like you were doing a trial of the music industry before you got into it. So from that standpoint, like that hands-on element of it, whatever you're going to go into, I feel like that's a really awesome place to start, where you can just do and not just read about it or think about it, right? You're actually doing it.
We come on to your musical career, and it's a fascinating and interesting career, and we could, I think, literally be here for hours talking about it. But let's go back to the very beginning, the origins. So you started your musical career in Toronto, where your song Wisdom Bus won a national songwriting contest award. Do you think the award opened doors and created musical opportunities? And can you tell us about using the money to record your first album, The Original Leap Year, which was, of course, released on your own label?
Yeah. Winning the award for the songwriting contest definitely opened up doors, but not from a sort of like recognition kind of thing. It was a cool thing to talk about. So my sort of like the egocentric part of me of the 20, however old I was, 20 or 21, was like, this looks cool. But it really was the prize money that was helpful, because I needed to pay for studio time to make this album, which you just mentioned, The Original Leap Year. So I was able to pay musicians, and that was really important to me to just, I think, to get in the zone of feeling professional about it, because I think you can go a long time as a musician and kind of buy into that starving artist thing. And I just love the fact that, okay, here's a chunk of money. It's going back into music. It's going into musicians' hands. And then it's going into pressing a CD, which is really funny to say. But yeah, so instrumental, very instrumental for sure.
Can I ask you about the process of recording The Original Leap Year? The challenges that were involved, obviously, as a debut artist, and actually the challenges also of releasing an album on your own label.
Yeah, so I started my label, quite honestly, like a lot of people start labels for sort of a punk rock reason, like, screw everyone, I'm going to do this on my own. I did it because no one wanted to sign me in Canada. So I was just like, well, I'll just do my own thing. And then I sort of became known as sort of a label kind of president at a very early age. It's not really what I planned for, but I like that idea of just like, okay, well, don't wait around for people. If no one's going to sign you, just make your own thing and go ahead and do it. But the challenges, I think, were mainly, it's a very small circle that you have when you come out of college. So I was sort of blessed with all my college friends being like my agent or my producer or my band, right? But I think my producer at the time, he was also my boyfriend. So it was sort of like, I know when you're finding yourself at that age, there was a lot of like turmoil. So some of the recording sessions were really like dramatic and people fighting and things like that. But then there were good things, I think that we made a really good album, right? And I guess just the doubt, like you have a lot of doubt as a young person. Like, there are times where you have blind faith and you're like, well, I'm totally going to get a record deal and this is going to work out, right? There's that part of you, which isn't even rooted in any sort of wisdom. It's just like, I'm going to make this happen somehow. But with that is also the doubt of like, what the heck is next, right? So I think that was a very sort of like just a crazy time, but I don't know. You don't think of it as crazy when you're in your 20s. You're just kind of so psyched to be making an album or like, dreaming of a record deal kind of thing.
From winning a nationwide songwriting competition, then going on to produce the debut album, we now talk about Mercury Records. How did the album come to the attention of Mercury, and can you share with us the story behind signing a contract with the label?
Yeah, so Original Leap Year, the album that I made with the prize money, had a little bit of press. So it got an article in a magazine, and that was read by a guy named Warren Brulé, who's no longer with us, but he used to work with Violent Femmes. And he got a copy of the album and then he passed it on to someone at Mercury. So sort of that like through the grapevine thing, which I always think is like the best way for people to learn about you is through a friend or through word of mouth. So yeah, I signed to Mercury. And of course it was like for no one to assign me in Canada and then I got a worldwide deal. It was sort of like a moment of, retribution, I guess. But yeah, what was the question about what it was like or how I got the deal?
Yeah, it was the story behind the deal. And I also kind of wanted to ask your thoughts when you actually signed the dotted line. Was it, was it kind of relief and I finally made it? Or was there some shadow of doubt in your mind, having learned about the history of so many bands and musicians being ripped off by major labels and also from publishing?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I actually was taking a video camera around with me that summer, the summer I was 21, the summer I signed my deal. And I remember there's a clip somewhere, I don't know where these tapes are, but there's a clip somewhere of me saying, as I signed the contract in my apartment in Toronto, I say to the camera, I'm like, this could be heaven or this could be a mistake. And I don't know if it was just like my personality of sort of like skeptical of everything, which, even though I was excited, I was also like unsure. Yeah, but it was more of a gut feeling that it could go either way. When in fact, like if I actually had learned about the industry, like it's one thing to learn about like, okay, if you get a contract, it's going to look like this. So read it through. But then it's a whole other thing to know about trends and things that could happen in the industry and like relationships between people. So yeah, it's because the way that it went, it makes that comment even more hilarious, really.
We'll talk about the album released on Mercury. The year was 1998. Mm-hmm. The album's called Public, which was inspired by the 1990s Britpop scene. Mm-hmm. What was it about that vibrant scene that caught your attention? And can you talk about the success that came from the album, which included the Canadian hit Summerlong, and also your nomination for Best New Solo Artist at the Juno Awards in 1999?
Mm-hmm. Well, I loved so much of what came out in the 80s. A lot of like, the Brit New Wave stuff. But then I kind of drifted away from that and I got into all kinds of other things in the early 90s. And then mid 90s, I discovered, Oasis and Verve and Stone Roses and all of that. And I was just super captivated because there was an element of melody and the production that I just had never heard before. So I just wanted to make an album like that. And I did. I came to London and made an album, which I think was my interpretation of a lot of those bands, my songs, plus that kind of a feel. And then to get a Juno nomination for Best New Artist, that was great. Although it wasn't really for any work that I did. It was just like for Best New Artist, which is still great. But I think subsequent nominations for the actual work were kind of more meaningful to me.
A significant chapter in your life now, 1999, and you're asked to join David Bowie's band.
Mm-hmm.
Can you recall the first time you met Bowie, and what were your first impressions?
Yeah, so I mean, just to set the tone for where I was when I met him, like the record deal had fallen through by then. So I was just like floating around, kind of probably not dealing with the tragedy of that for me. And I just decided to go to New York. So I was playing shows in New York and I met Holly Palmer. She had just joined Bowie's band as a backing vocalist, and then they were looking for a second singer. So she invited me into the band. I got the job kind of even before Bowie heard my voice. And then I just got to work. So I started to learn all these songs, and he was doing this new album, Hours, it was called. But then he was also doing all the old stuff like Starman and Ziggy and stuff from the 70s. So I learned it really well. And then we had our first rehearsal, and that was the first time I met him. So it was probably September of 99. And yeah, he kind of the whole band was in the rehearsal room first. And then we were probably just setting up and playing. And then he strolls in, and he was very casual. He had this hoodie on, and he had his longtime assistant Coco with him. And he was just really just friendly. He's like, "Oh, you must be Emm." And I was like, "Nice to meet you." And then I remember doing a horrible job at the first rehearsal, because I'd never been a backing vocalist before. So there's an element of me just going what am I supposed to do? And what am I doing here? Even though I learned the song so well, it just felt so foreign to me. And I remember going up to him after the first day. We probably practiced for maybe 3 hours. They weren't long practices. And I said, "I'm so sorry. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. It'll be better tomorrow." And he was like, "Oh, you're fine." He's just very relaxed, and that was the first day.
We'll give a little bit of background and plotted history about your work with David Bowie. You're a backup singer, which you've already spoken about, and a keyboard player for Bowie, and you performed at Glastonbury, the TV show later with Jules Holland, Saturday Night Live, and you featured on the albums Glastonbury 2000 and Bowie at the Beeb and Toy. Do you have a standout moment of working with David? And what do you think it taught you? What do you think he taught you musically? What did you kind of learn from the overall experience?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, there's so many standout moments. I think doing Glastonbury was probably the highlight, because it was a festival that I really wanted to go to as a, lover of music. And I remember, because you're headlining, you're sort of backstage, and you couldn't go and just go off and get lost in the crowd of everyone, right? So it was so amazing just to be in front of that many people. And I've talked about this before, where he, on the way to the festival, he said to the band, we were all in this little van kind of bus thing. It wasn't a fancy bus, I remember that. And he just said, "Okay, guys, this is not about us. This is about them." And he kind of went on to explain that it's the sheer magnitude of everyone. It's just really, really about them. And I thought that was so interesting. And I got it once we got on stage, because that energy just coming off the crowd was incredible, right? And then his energy we had just come from some shows where he had lost his voice. So there was an element of just like, are we going to make it through this? Like, because if he loses his voice here, we're all screwed, right? So we made it through. And I think the real highlight for me is when we knew his voice was going to be fine on that during that show. And you can see it, like if you see the concert back, like we start off a little tentative and then it's like, we know he's going to be okay. So everyone's just like on fire. So yeah, and the things that I learned from him, there's just so many, but I think the thing that I took away from it is like just the curiosity for the creation of music, and it was great to see someone who is such a legend and a famous icon care about that more than celebrity, right? Because I think celebrity was sort of ho-hum to him by then. It was sort of like, I mean, I'm sure he loved parts of it, but he was lit up about the work. So I think, that's a lesson for everyone. Like, doesn't matter how famous you are. It's kind of about, I don't know, I guess it's about whatever lights you up personally. But to me, I loved that he was so about the work.
I'd like to ask you, when that moment ended, your tenure in the band, did you keep in touch with him, and did you use him as a mentor? How did that kind of relationship, did it develop in any way, or did it dissolve after that experience?
We kept in touch by email, and often we talk about music quite a bit, right up until the end, actually. Like in 2016, there was a song by a band called Destroyer, called Times Square, which is super Bowie-like. And I remember just loving it. And I sent him like a link to it or something. And I was like, you have to hear this. And he's like, I just downloaded that. Like there were certain things that were really cool to find out that we were both kind of into. And he'd always listen to the albums that I put out, or at least say that he listened to them. So I loved that, and I wouldn't say we were buddy, but we definitely kept in touch, which was lovely.
Interestingly, you've released music as an independent artist on your own label. You've also been signed to a major label, and we spoke about your brief time with Mercury Records. Mm-hmm. Would you say you prefer working as an independent musician? And of all the recording projects you've worked on, which one are you most proud of, and why?
Yeah, that's a great question. I've actually just made an album that's coming out next year. I know it's maybe not fair to talk about something that's not out, but it's really, I think, what I'm most proud of. I wrote some songs with, I often write alone, and I've waved that flag for I have to write by myself or it's not legit or something. But I started writing songs with my then fiance, who's a poet. And we just had like a blast in the pandemic, just writing songs. And we made this new record. So I think, to answer your question, I had to kind of go indie for so long to sort of find what it is that I really want to do, which is upcoming. But a lot of my favorite albums are actually the ones I produce myself. If I need to talk about those albums, there's an album called Goddess that I made on an 8-track, and it's very representative of the darker time in my life where I'm not really able to work through a lot of difficulty. And only after the fact can you see, I look at that album and I'm like, oh my God, it's 2009 and I was going through all this stuff and it wasn't apparent to me, but I was writing songs about it, which is very odd. So yeah, that album, an album called 21st Century Ballads, I like a lot. That was produced by a friend of mine, Joe Corcoran. So I think, yeah, I tend to find joy in a lot of the different parts of it.
Obviously, one of the standout moments in your career was the collaboration with a music icon, and we've covered David Bowie in some kind of depth this evening, or shall I say this afternoon. I want to turn the clock back now to 2013, and this is an unusual collaboration with Canadian astronaut Chris Hadfield to perform a cover version of David Bowie again, Space Oddity. How did the collaboration happen? And can you discuss some of the other projects you both collaborated on?
Yeah, well, Chris is an astronaut who comes from Sarnia as well. So we share that. And he was commander of the International Space Station in 2013. And he called me from space, which was crazy. I had just given birth to my second child, a daughter. And he said, I want to record Space Oddity up here. And I was like, okay. And I tried to direct him to like a different song. I remember. But he really wanted to do that song. And it was funny because I didn't do Space Oddity with Bowie and I always wanted to. So it was very odd that Chris wanted to do this. So yeah, we just like in this actual room that I'm in, I played a little piano part, sort of rejigged it a bit. I was actually thinking of this song, Here Comes the Flood by Peter Gabriel, which is one of my favorite songs of all time, where he's just got this really sparse piano bit. And then I sent that to Chris in space, and then he sang on it into like an iPad on GarageBand, which I think is so funny because, you know, it's like of all the tech you could have up there, GarageBand. But he did a great job, and his voice sounds so different in space, like just much more ethereal. And then when he sent it back to me, that's when I started to get my friend Joe, who I just mentioned, to add bass, drums, guitar, because I just felt it needed to have that vibe. Yeah, and it was an amazing thing because it wasn't like a planned sort of viral event. It was just like he wanted to record this. He thought it would be important. He changed the lyrics of the song, which is a bold move because in the original, the astronaut doesn't make it. So yeah, the whole journey of making that was crazy because Bowie was kind of involved, but not until the very end. I was able to link them together, which I was very proud of, to be able to do that. And then Chris shot himself singing along to the song in space a few days before coming back to Earth, and it became the first music video in outer space. And it was lovely because we're kind of inundated with movies and CGI and Hollywood and everything, and there was nothing CGI about it. It was just like, there's the Earth outside a window, and there's a guy floating around singing. So yeah, it was great to just a beautiful thing to be a part of. And I know David loved it. And I was like, when he passed away, it was one of the things that Chris and I kind of felt just happy that he had that experience, like hearing his song in space.
Can we now discuss some of the other musical projects you've worked on? You've been a member of the musical collective The Cake Sale, the Canadian folk trio Trent Seven, and the hard rock 1980s inspired band Trapper, who opened for Def Leppard. Can you just give us some more kind of background on those projects and kind of how you feel about being part of those collaborations?
Yeah, well, to be a part of the Cake Sale was awesome because I just went to Ireland kind of on a whim, wanting to explore my ancestry, but also to tour. So I met Brian Crosby from Bell X1 over there, and it was just lovely to be part of like a community that just kind of wanted to make something beautiful for a good cause. And then, my friend Nina from the Cardigans came and sang on the song, and it's just really lovely. And Trent Severn was a band that I wanted to kind of have together as a female sort of roots trio. And I learned a lot from that experience, and got to really tour around Canada and see a lot of places I hadn't seen before. Trapper, it's funny, it's kind of everything's all over the place, but the reason for that is because I love so many different kinds of music. So there undoubtedly would have been like all these different kinds of projects, but Trapper kind of feeds into that love I have for 80s metal. And yeah, I mean, my brother Frank was in that. So again, like all of these projects, the common thread is just kind of following joy, and being curious, maybe in that Bowie way of like, oh, what do I want to try this month or whatever. But to open for Def Leppard was a huge highlight. Like I loved Hysteria when I was younger, and to be able to be on that stage and have Joe Elliott say like, you can use my catwalk. Like it's crazy, right? And it was just, yeah, it was kind of a life-changing time.
Outside of music, you acted and sang in the 2008 film drama One Week. And in 2016, you starred in Joni Mitchell, River, at the Grand Theatre in London.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any ambitions to pursue an acting career? And do you have any roles lined up for the future?
Well, that's a really nice question. I don't. I love actors though, and I wish that I maybe knew more about how to storytell through acting. But I think right now music is really my form of communicating. Yeah, it was very hard work to be in a film. You had to be up at 5 and then you didn't go to bed till midnight. So as a, spoiled musician, I found it a lot of work.
One thing we haven't really spoken about is songwriting and storytelling. And for years and years, you've been a lyricist, telling stories, I guess, through your music. But I wanted to ask you about what made you decide to write your own book, The Healing Power of Singing. How would you describe the book? And what was the process like writing it? And what has been the overall reaction?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, everything for the book stemmed from 2016, which was a really hard time in my life when my first marriage fell apart. And I kind of spiraled into a bad place. By 2018, I was sort of like tired of being in that bad place. And a couple of things happened. Parlophone Records released the Glastonbury concert. It was a big package with vinyl and DVD. Remember those?
Yeah, I do.
And CD. So yeah, people wanted to talk about that concert, but I was like, oh, I don't really understand. Like, I don't really remember a whole lot from it. So I had to watch that concert, and watching the concert shifted something for me because it was a chance to look at what my life was like when I was 25. And, you asked me what the highlight of my time with Bowie was, it was that, right? So you kind of go, oh, well, there was a high point in my life and now I'm like way down here, what the heck, right? So I really started to think about just my role in music and voice and singing, which I'd worked really hard to become a singer because I don't consider myself a natural singer. So I just really started to think about that. And actually at the same time, the Bohemian Rhapsody film came out. So here there was like this real emphasis on the power of, great singers, and the power of the voice. So I just thought I should write about this. And at first it was going to be a how-to about singing. But as I went along, I realized the lessons that I learned about singing and music were kind of woven in with my life lessons. So the book is kind of part memoir, it's part how-to, and then it's also, well, I guess it's just those things. There's some diagrams.
Interestingly, in life, we kind of go through different chapters and we experience different things through age, maturity, and experience. And you've spoken about motherhood, writing a book, all the opportunities you've had, and great opportunities, which we discovered in this interview. But has there ever been times where you've just felt like walking out on the music industry and just having a complete career change?
For sure. And I think that it's okay to have those moments. For a while, in that kind of like finding my way again state, I was a support worker. And I just kind of said, oh, I'm really done with music. And I think maybe I'll even like study psychology or be a psychologist or something, or I don't know, work with people with addiction or something. And the thing about being a support worker is that everything I did with the people I was supporting ended up coming back to being about music. So I would play the music, play the people I supported music, see how much it affected them, be reminded of the power of music, drive around with, you know, an older gentleman that I was supporting and like play him like St. Patrick's Day songs around St. Patrick's Day and see him light up, you know. So I think everything was just drawing me back to music in that time. So I think you can like exit any career, and if you're meant to kind of be in it anyway, you're just going to get drawn back to it.
I have one final question, and then we move on to the quickfire 13 questions that we ask all your take guests, things we maybe didn't know about them that's happened in their life, things they love, maybe things they're not so keen on. My final question was, what are your plans for the future, and what advice would you give anyone looking to pursue a career in the music business today? And how do you look back at your own choices, experiences, and time in the business?
Ooh, that's a big question. What was the first part of that question?
Yeah, sorry. I put about 5 questions into one.
Yeah.
It's like being in the psychologist chair. What are your plans for the future?
Oh yeah. Okay.
And what advice would you give anyone looking to pursue a career in music today?
Yeah, well, for sure, this new album that I mentioned, very excited about it. We're going to have it come out with a couple of labels. And I think my advice would be to sort of like really get in touch with your joy, like what makes you really, really happy, even if it's like a guilty pleasure, like what is your real joy? Because I think when you're younger, it's super easy to get kind of led by the older people, the more powerful people around you towards maybe what they think you should be. But if you always know what it is that makes you happy, it's a gut thing, which it sounds a little cliche, like follow your gut. But honestly, it is, you could probably fast track through a lot of pain if you just did that. And also one thing I kind of wish I did is surround myself with more women. I think there's a real power to having other women that you can share thoughts and like-minded, you know, ideas with. And I didn't really have that, you know, like growing up, and then early days of my career. So, yeah, I don't know if I answered all the questions in that.
You did indeed.
Okay.
In our conversation, you've spoken about family and having children. I'm interested to find out what their perception is of you as a musician, and are they creative or musical in any way?
Yeah, I have a boy and a girl. Their perception is not clear. They don't like it when I sing. There are times where I just have to sing and they're going to have to listen to it. They're starting to like, I'm starting to bring them to more concerts, but I've made a little bit of a mistake with parenting where I sort of like really focused on parenting and did not kind of expose them to my career a whole lot. So, you know, if I had to go to a show when they were younger, I would just leave them with babysitters or whatever, family. I think that was a bit of a mistake. So I think it's actually a real kind of like it's a gift to your kids if you show them what you do. So any moms out there who are like, how the hell am I going to juggle it all? Like, just do it. Like you have to juggle it anyway. So you might as well just take them to work if you can. And my daughter is very musical. So she's playing piano and singing and stuff like that. So let's see what happens there.
A lovely way to end the interview. And we come up to that moment, Emm Gryner. These are the questions we ask every single Your Take guest.
Okay.
These kind of quick fire questions to wrap up the interview. Things we maybe didn't know about you. always get some interesting responses to these 13. So you don't have to think about these in any detail. Here we go. Number 1, Em. What would you say is your favorite pastime?
Oh gosh. I know you're supposed to say this very fast.
No, no problem.
Maybe just writing stories.
We've spoken about music, and more music. We haven't touched upon film. Well, we did briefly about a film you appeared in. But what is your favorite film and why?
Oh gosh. I really liked The Graduate. That was a great film. Should really get more acquainted with film. I haven't watched a lot of films lately, but yeah, that was a favorite because I don't know, just like the vintageness of it.
Tremendous soundtrack as well from
Yes.
Simon and Garfunkel. Very much a film, I think, of the 60s.
Yeah, very transportive. Transportive.
I couldn't see that film being made in another era. I don't think it would quite work the same.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
You mentioned a love of writing, but who would you cite as your favorite novelist?
Oh gosh, probably my husband, but I haven't read his novel yet. So there's a lot wrong with that answer.
He's a fictional writer?
He's a writer of many things. Yes.
We've spoken about kind of turning your back on the music industry, but if you could have had a different profession, what would it have been?
Probably like radio journalism, like being on the radio, maybe doing what you're doing.
Do you know what? I would love to be a journalist. Yeah, I think that's secretly the thing I would have loved to have done the most.
I think that you are one, sort of.
I'm not so sure about that, but who knows? Maybe one day, who knows? Who in life, would you say has been your greatest inspiration?
Ooh, that's a really good question. I think my daughter. Yeah, my kids. My daughter, I've learned so much from her, for sure.
In another lifetime, we both said we would have loved to have been journalists, but do you read a newspaper? And if so, which one?
I read the St. Mary's Independent quite frequently. It's a local paper here. It's filled with lots of amazing things.
What would you say next is your favorite food?
Oh gosh. Fruit, grapes. I'll go with grapes. Yeah.
This next question stumps a lot of our guests. We asked them to name their favorite cultural icon. It could maybe be a figure from history, a political figure, someone who's changed the world or reshaped it in some sort of way. Who would you choose?
That's a good question. There's a lot of people who do come to mind.
Always a tricky one, this one. Yeah,
definitely. Joni Mitchell. Go with her.
We'll go curse words next. What is your favorite curse word and why?
Biatch, probably. I don't know. Can be formed into so many different things.
What would you say is your favorite place or holiday destination?
Oh gosh. I do like Ireland very much. So I'm going to go with somewhere in the south of Ireland.
A very nice choice. I don't want to ask you this, a musician, always a tricky one. Who is your favorite music artist and what would you choose as your favorite album?
Oh, probably Peter Gabriel. So
last two. What would you say is your greatest achievement to date?
Oh, having my kids and not destroying their lives completely.
And Emm Gryner, the final question from the Your Take interview tonight. How do you wish to be remembered?
As a kind, funny person who loved to make music.
thank you kindly for being a guest on Your Take this evening. We've had a few little technical issues off camera, so thank you for your patience and persistence, and thank you for taking part. It's been a fascinating insight into your musical story, your journey, all the incredible things you've done, and hopefully more to come. So thank you. And how do we find out more?
Well, you can go to my website, Emm Gryner, EMMGRYNER.com, and I'm on all the social media stuff. So just hop on to any of those. Thank you so much. It's great to talk to you.
And wishing you all the very best with the future release of the new album. When can we expect to hear it?
Probably early next year. So I'll let you know for sure.
Thank you kindly.
All right. Thanks, James.